incognito, it may be best to turn off your cameras. Now, hopefully, if anyone at home has any questions, if they use their hands up reactions button on the bottom of your screen, if you're on Microsoft, I've got no idea what Mr. Apple does. Just click on your hands up icon and I'll acknowledge you and you can ask your question. And hopefully that will work. So let me introduce Brendan Lewis. He's sitting there with Kirsten and David. Brendan is a seasoned technology leader with extensive experience in international growth. He's the president of RealThing AI and head of global business development for the company. RealThing AI is a company that specializes in developing conversational AI and applying into a niche group, the aged and visually impaired. He set up the company's US operations and has sold $100 million plus program into the US government over the past 4 years since launching there. He holds undergraduate qualifications in commerce and computing from Curtin University in Australia and postgraduate qualifications in accounting and finance from Monash University, also in Australia. He has undertaken executive education at Harvard Business School and Kellogg School of Management. So, Brendan and your team, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, David. So, RealThing AI, can everyone hear me okay? It sounds very loud to me in my ears. Okay. RealThing AI is, we're not a huge company. We're 30 staff, but we're across 5 countries. We have a 3-man executive group, of which I'm the not technology one. There's the CEO, the chief technology officer, and there's me. So I deal in our strategy, and I'm the big salesman for the group. And I have teams. I have operational teams in the US and the UK, and a couple of people in Australia that work in what we call the commercial team. We started off with research into intelligent agents around the 2010, 2012 mark. The work was originally funded by research grants, consulting work, and angel investors kind of started the business. And it was, there was a bit of work getting done in defense, in real-time kind of decision support systems. And everyone wanted to do something different. So they wanted to do something that was a bit more palatable to tell their children what they did for a living. When I say everyone, there was 3 people in the company at that stage, and I wasn't one of them. And they initially they built a smart talking bear, a bear that you could tell stories to and would talk to you and tell you, and you could be the central character in the story. And there was a couple of problems in that. The market timing was wrong. Hasbro was interested but wanted to buy pieces of plastic for $10 and sell them for $100, and that wasn't the type of business we were. So things had to change. And a friend of the company was a guy called Graham Ennis, who was the disabilities commissioner at the time, and he was a visually impaired guy and said, "I've got some issues." And he started to, and we started to look at the blind and visually impaired market. So our technology, or our core intellectual property, we call Real Dialogue, which is it's basically an automatic speech recognition system and a synthetic speech attached to an intelligent agent. We use BDI agents, belief, desires, and intent agents to do things on the behalf of our users, so the users could talk to it and get responses and get action as well. So people say to me then, a bit like Siri or a bit like Alexa, and we say yes, but the difference is that we're talking about a multi-threaded environment and massively scalable, and we also deal in what we call domain-specific conversations. So when people want a high level of confidence in the response, so for something like some of the general purpose AIs that use machine learning, they come to an answer. The answer may not be the right answer, but it's generally a good one, but it may not be completely right. and the AI doesn't know when it's wrong, which is part of the issue there. Ours is more limited, but you can have a high degree of confidence in the answer. We use it for things like people being able to interrogate libraries to find books that they want in an iterative kind of thing. Find me books about Martians, and you can get a list, and then say by Wells, and drill down to the War of the Worlds, and then stream live to it. We very much focus on blind and visually impaired people. We have now in market, we have a couple of products that are based on Android phones that we take over. One of them is a talking phone, another one is a media player. So the visually impaired person can ask it things that it wants to talk about, like, my older brother's in Boston. What's the weather in Boston?
The weather in Boston, Massachusetts, United States, is 31 degrees, snow. Today's minimum was 28 degrees and maximum was 34 degrees.
Cancel. So that was a very simple. I just wanted to prove to you that it kind of worked. We have thousands of customers in the UK. We have hundreds of customers in the US at the moment. Only just recently launched our retail product. And we also have a lot of professional services work, hundreds of millions of dollars in the pipeline with the US government. So that's as much as I'm going to talk on our technology, which we call Real Dialogue, and Real Sam, our blind solution, is an application in our environment. I do have a computer science background, but I haven't written software or been a technologist as such for 23 years this year. So I'm allowed to use my own computer, but I'm not allowed to touch things inside other people's computers. So when I joined the company as employee number 5 in 2018 with a specific mandate to look at our UK business, which was having some problems. So I had a technology background, I had a sales and marketing background, and I had a lot of experience with the UK because I'd been the Australian representative for the City of Greater London for the previous 6 years until I got tired of it and decided I want to do something new. So they said, look, great, can you help us with the UK? And I was thinking, well, I'm just going to spend the next chunk of my life back in the UK doing things, trying to figure out how do we make the business there work better. And about 3 months after I joined a US government agency, which I can't name on the video because of the contractual requirements we have, approached us and said, look, we really like your technology. Can you come and show us? So I was like, okay. So I flew over to Washington, DC and showed them. They said, we want to do something. I helped them write a tender for that. Unsurprisingly, we won the tender. They did another one. We won another tender. We want to hold the business. And we as an organization then said, well, we've got to make a decision. What do we want to do? Because we're tiny, and we had to decide whether we wanted to be doing the work in the US at all, because we were full to the gills trying to deal with the UK. And we decided that if we didn't, someone else would take the opportunity. So if we didn't, we needed to do it to block everyone out. So like we generally do, we overcommit, we bite off more than we can chew. We all work flat out. So I was traveling back and forth to the US a lot and starting to become a bit tired. So I decided to up and move part of my family to the US in 2019, which was, full of its own kind of challenges, because I had one of my children had just started university and said they want to stay here. The other one was still at high school. I think this is generally why you send 20-somethings on overseas travel, because it's just so much harder when you're in your 50s. And in fact, the wheel, it's quite obvious to me that the wheels will have fallen off completely if my son had said to us something like, I hate it here, I want to go home. At the end of the day, we would have had to return. Luckily, he didn't. Anyway, so I set up a C corporation in Delaware. We set up a business in Washington, DC, and started prosecuting all this work that we did. Starting in the US, it's a fantastic market in terms of size. But it was tough, and it was made tougher by the fact that the pandemic happened, and that just kind of ruined everything for us. And at the time the pandemic had really, at the time it really blew up, my wife had travelled back to Australia to see our daughter and get one of her hips replaced, and she got stuck. And so I didn't see my wife for about 9 months. And there was just myself and my teenage son, which was probably not my finest parenting moments occurred in that period. Lots of either shouting or not speaking at all, because he hadn't this idea that academic success was useful. He hadn't really bought into that concept at all, and thought schools should be a bit more arbitrary, whether he went or not, or did work or not. Anyway, so that was tough at that level. There was also a lot of toughness as an Australian going over there, that a lot of things just aren't recognised. You don't need to be an American, but you need to have the attributes of an American to be successful there. Like, you need an American driver's license, because that's the primary form of identification. And in fact, there's buildings that I've been blocked from entering, US government buildings, because I didn't have a US driver's license. And at that moment in time, I didn't have my passport on me. But I would say, look, I've got my Australian driver's license, a photo ID issued by an Australian. Don't care, you're not coming in, stand outside in the rain. Endlessly filling out forms that would ask questions along the lines of, which American state were you born in? And you have no option. So you think, oh, now I'm lying. I'm born in California. And there was lots of things like that kind of occurred that had made that was difficult. Lots and lots of forms, things you couldn't do. The acronyms and bureaucracy is difficult, and there's disconnects in technology as well. So a company formed each company has its own laws around forming companies. So you form a company in a state, and so companies can have the same name. For companies to operate effectively, or really as soon as you get started, you need to get from the Internal Revenue Service, the IRS, what's called an employer identification number. And that's the equivalent of your ACN, ABN number. You have this number, and that's unique. When I got the EIN number, which was difficult to get from here, because you kept on having to there was like this circular logic that you couldn't get out of. Eventually I found someone that could help me, and we received I received an email which had attached to it a photocopy of a fax with our EIN number handwritten on it. And this is 2019, and this is what happened. That was weird. We also have this other bit of weirdness, like on occasion we receive checks. Maybe we receive a check a week in payment. And the way that we process them is they get scanned in the office, and then the scan gets sent to someone who prints out a copy of the check, cut it out so it looks nice, and then uses an app on their phone to bank that photocopy of the check. This is how we operate. It's just weird. Yeah. There's a lot of that kind of thing going on. There's also operating from the east coast of the US was very tough for me, because I would have mornings dealing with the UK and our people in Italy. Afternoons I'd work in America, and then evenings I'd work in Melbourne, and everyone thinks they've just got a chunk of your time. And then you kind of look and say, well, I'm doing 13-hour days, 4 days a week. It's like when I went there, I had red hair, and then I went downhill. And also the administration. So I've now in the US, I've got staff in Virginia, Colorado, Arkansas, North Carolina, California, and Iowa. And because as an organization, we didn't care, we just wanted the best person, and we're all operating a bit virtually, and the salespeople flying around anyway, so they don't care. But it just means, and we also got the engineering team in Melbourne. It just means that the amount of admin-y stuff comes at us like a fire hose of just, you need to put in, where's your W-22B? I don't know, what the hell's a W-22B? Apparently it's some form in Colorado. There's that kind of stuff goes on. It also, as an organisation, because we are a small business operating this way, our finances are always stretched. We're bitten off more than we can chew. There's time zone issues. There's family issues. I'd ring my mother, and my mother would tell me I could die at any moment. And there's a bit of truth to that. She's not sick. She's just quite, she's in her late 80s now. And so eventually that's one of the reasons why I'm now living back in Melbourne, is because I wanted to actually spend a bit more time with my parents. There's also the concept, as a smaller organisation, there's an endless tension inside us, a trade-off between, do we create value for the business and our customers, or do I spend my time creating value for perceived value for future opportunities? So do I work on making our UK business more lucrative, or do I chase something with Boston Dynamics or Facebook or a gaming company? You know, it's those things. So chasing something on Facebook will cost us a fortune, and there isn't any quick income out of it. But potential investors and our current investors love it. They love it. And it's exciting for them that we can be doing business here, or Boston Dynamics, we do business with them. It's really exciting. But at the same time, I've got people saying I've got exactly the same investors saying you need to improve your margins in the UK. So that we always have those kind of challenges. Mind you, it's fun. I am in the 3.5, almost just under 4 years we were there. I visited 30 states. I did courses at Harvard and Kellogg. I was co-author of a book, so I was quite pleased by myself by that. So although it's quite tough and it continues to be tough, I wouldn't swap it for the world, because every time we win, you know, it's incredibly exciting and also doing good. I was speaking to, I have customer support people in Arkansas, and I was speaking to one of them this morning, and she told me her story about how she was like, "This is how you changed my life. I thought there was nothing worth living for. And now, you know, everything there's a fair bit of pressure on us. It's just like, oh my, like if I want to fire her, like there's a world of trouble. I don't want to fire her, but there's a kind of nice thing that we make money and we improve people's lives, which is, you know, a previous version of me. I was the finance director of a machine tool engineering company. No one cares. I was an army officer in a tank regiment. It's not kind of good stuff to tell your kids. There's those kind of things. Not tank, armored vehicles. Anyway, so it's incredibly rewarding and fun, but it is tiring. Right, I'll talk a little bit about our working with our demographic as well. That was the third thing I want to talk about. And then if people have got questions, I'm more than happy to chat. I'll respond to those. So when we started, I joined a company that said, look, we're developing voice operated products for blind people. And that was great. Except blind people is quite a small sub-segment, because there's these definition kind of issues, and in fact there's weirdness as well. Like all areas, when you pick at them, there comes weirdness. So in some parts of the UK you can be blind here, but over there you're not blind. If you lose an eye, are you blind? You know, there's those kind of questions. So, and we also realize that they're a very small group, and also there's a lot of economic damage taken. If you lose your vision, you generally take a fairly substantial economic hit, which means we have a customer base that's generally not particularly affluent. So saying to them, I want you to buy a device that's worth 1,200 Australian dollars, 1,400 Australian dollars, can be a hard sell to people. Not only that, the community is actually a lot bigger than that. So we realize that blind people are actually, most of the people we deal with aren't actually completely blind. They're visually impaired at various degrees. And in fact, 90% of people that call themselves blind have some vision, and people that have some vision want to use it. So when we're dealing with customers that we say, oh, we only need an audio interface, turns out that's not actually particularly true. Those that, you know, even if they've got to hold their phone up to their eye, they still want to see something. They still want to see what's going on. So we're designing primarily for voice, but then we've got this visual component to it as well. But also, sadly, visual impairment is generally caused by age-related diseases, so that 75% of people who are visually impaired are over 65. Life tends to go downhill. Now, so we realize that actually we're not just looking at blind and visually impaired people. We're actually talking about blind and visually impaired seniors. This is the majority of our marketplace, and especially because our device is kind of its proposition is it's a very simple way of people who can't operate an iPhone because they're in trouble, they've forgotten what to do, they just find accessibility modes or triple tap swipes and things like this. They find that it's all too hard, and so we're designing for a demographic that's looking for a simple solution that's primarily audio but has some vision components to it. And that was good, except things that, as we go and we look at customers and we kind of say, oh, but what's happening there? And what we realized is that if you're over 65, and some of our customers are like in their 90s, if you're over 65, chances are that you're probably hearing impaired. And then so we had all these kind of arguments inside all these arguments inside the firm that, like, there's people saying, we don't deal with deaf people, we deal with blind people. And they have to say, yeah, but look, if we draw Venn diagrams, these are all the same people that we're talking about. So they're starting to lose vision. They may have issues like macular degeneration or glaucoma or more genetic issues, or they've had a traumatic injury or things like that. But they're also they're getting old and they're getting grumpy and they're losing their hearing. Then what we've also discovered is that this demographic, also they're more likely to have cognitive impairments and more likely to have touch impairments. So one of the problems that we have is that as people age, their skin apparently becomes drier. And what happens is that capacitive touchscreens don't work as well with old fingers. So this concept of people going, bloody thing doesn't work, is actually there's sound science behind why this doesn't work. So we work in an environment where we use Samsung phones, and Samsung's attempting to pretty much wipe mechanical buttons off. So, and we have those type of devices, but if people are out and about outside, they may not like them. But this is why those pens are actually more popular amongst an aged community than a young community, is because young people's fingers just work better with screens. So we've got these, so we started off thinking we were dealing with blind people, but then it became blind, visually impaired, seniors, hearing impairments, touch impairments, cognitive impairments. This is this kind of group, which means that how we build solutions then needs to change. We need to have more visual. We need to have things where if we need to have better solutions for someone that is in a wheelchair and doesn't have fine grade motor skills and has have difficulty touching the button on the screen, the tap to talk button, we need to be able to deal for those. There's also a little bit of tension from me commercially that generally our customers want to buy our products outright and we want to sell them subscriptions. So we have this kind of balancing act to figure out, because subscription business is as a business, it's much better for us to sell a subscription than it is to sell them an object. So I try to sell objects and just layer subscription options on them so that we can optimize the device for them and they can get the bits that they want. So when designing for visually impaired people, what we have an internal document called the Good Design Guide for how we do things. And the things that we have to remind ourselves, so of our users, 90% of them have some sight and they wish to use it. So we've got to think about visual interfaces. From the hearing impairments, you're talking about 33% of people at age 60 through to 80% at age 90 have got a hearing impairment. They rely more heavily on memory, and you're designing for an audience that has to rely on memory, but without visual prompts being there. So you don't talk about, there's not necessarily things on the screen in the screen real estate. So we need to have consistency in the way we do things. So we have documents that these are the verbs that we use. We use the same verbs. In this scenario, we use this verb. So you could say list, search, find, whatever, but in our documentation, we will use the word search, and we'll pick the word search. We have to think about the words that we actually construct as well to make sure that they're easy. So we avoid technical words where we can. So early versions of our device used words like configure wireless for turning on the Wi-Fi. I don't know who did that. That was ridiculous. But also words like toggle we avoid. In other environments, so in our book modules, we use words like order rather than sort. So if I could use the word order and sort, kind of meaning you want to do the same thing, sort by author, order this, list by author. We use the word order because for an automatic speech recognition system, order is 2 syllables and it's easy to get right. And for someone that's maybe having problems speaking, using a 2-syllable word is much better than using a 1-syllable word. 3 syllables is great as well. So, but also then words that are within the demographic. So don't say toggle, which is 2, but maybe in that case, it's better to use switch or something like that. Our users are also very easily flustered with the technology. So we have a generous returns policy to say, look, if it doesn't work out, give it back. I'll give you 60 days to master the device. The reason it used to be 14 days, but we found at 14 days was our legal requirement, but we found at 14 days, everyone got flustered. So we said, well, actually, commercially, it makes almost no difference to us. Let's blow it out to 60 days so people are relaxed and can get the handle of the device and not get flustered. But also it means that in the way that we do things, we need to have appropriate clues. So in error messages, so when the device doesn't know what the hell you're talking about, we have a what we call a talent called the no comprendo talent, which says, I don't know what you're talking about. But that's the kind of the worst case scenario. We don't want to get there. What we do want to get to is a place where the device is saying, I almost understand what you're saying. You've said search blah, 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 blah. I think you're looking for a book. If you're looking for a book, say search for books with title Harry Potter or search for books by J.K. Rowling or things like that. We also, in examples, we have learned the hard way not to use complex names for examples like J.R. Tolkien, because we haven't found a synthetic speech module that we can plug in that can pronounce Tolkien properly. Tolkien. Also, when people have been, we don't want to fight with other technologies. So when people they say, I use Alexa at home, we make sure that Alexa type language also works for people. So in Australia, the Google Assistant solution is much more popular, but in the US, it's massively second to Alexa in our experience. All the statistics and the analysis says, they're close, but we're running a field test at the moment where 95% of you, we said we want Google and Alexa users because we do some stuff on smart speakers, and 95% of users are Alexa. And this is also true to our experience. In fact, I haven't met anyone in the US who have had a Google Assistant at home other than us who are testing things. Yeah, and it's just different market, different things. And that's another thing we have. There's also the words that cause us heartache. And if I say call Kristen, that's fine. If I say ring Kristen, in America, no one knows what I'm talking about. But if in the UK, I can say ring Kristen, I can say give Kristen a buzz. But there's also like words like, what was the one we were discussing the other day? Oh, that how much battery is left in the device. So we say, what's your battery level? And it responds. What's your battery level?
Current battery level is 89%.
So that's great. The Americans want it to say charge. Then I discovered this yesterday in conversation. The Americans think that if I use the phrase your battery's dead, I think that's obscene. Your battery's flat. That's what makes sense. So you're flat. You got no charge, versus you got no battery. So we're dealing in two English language. Our primary markets are both English language, and it's not just spelling. It's actually we have to do different word use. And then there's the Bible. At one stage we said, well, let's do a shortcut to the Bible, because people in Texas gave us feedback and said, I want it to say, read me the good book. And then it became, well, which version of the Bible are you talking about? You want the King James version? You want this version? You want that version? Like we've got a number of different versions available to people. And then our Jewish users are saying, well, we're not having that. You know, we want our stuff. And it's like, are you anti-Semitic because you don't have the Torah? Is it on there? So and in the demographic of visually impaired people, one of the things that we have noticed is they tend to be a bit polarized between just happy to be looked after and I'm going to fight you to the death to get my thing. There's people are very pedantic, they can be angry, they're ready to fight at the drop of a hat versus they're just happy for it all to work out nicely. We also find that like our initial kind of role models for who we're designing for was a couple in the UK. And we designed for them until eventually we said, look, hang on a second. These people have been blind since birth, effectively blind. One of them blind since birth, the other one effectively blind since birth. They both know Braille. Braille is a young person's thing. Old people don't go learn Braille. These people cope with their lives and they have different skills, and someone who's been blind their entire life operates differently in the kitchen than someone who loses their vision when they're 65 and all of a sudden thinks it's the end of the world and they want to sit there and be a blob and they're unmotivated to learn things. I've got a friend, Sharon, who's CEO of the San Francisco Lighthouse, and she's incredible. You can't actually tell that I know she's blind, but you can't tell. She can feel people come into the room by shifts in air and temperature, and she turns around and faces you and you speak and she looks at you. And she when I try to trick her, she knows, like I come up behind her and I'll breathe, like I'll come up behind her in an event like this and I breathe heavily, and she said, I can't stand Australians. I haven't even spoken, and she knew it was me. So actually that wasn't what she said. It was a bit more vulgar, to be honest. But we have there's kind of things that it's quite a surprising demographic. The things that you would do, you say, well, just put it in the user guide. Who's looking at the user guide? I published a 30-day new customer survey at 30 days. It's a visual survey. We have a response rate like 2%. We have to turn it into an audio survey, which I've got people doing at the moment, because a demographic won't do that. They won't. Like when we think about things like support issues, so in the kind of standard support model of, you know, level 1, level 2, level 3 support, or what we call level 0, which is customers supporting themselves, it's hard to get customers to support themselves. They're old and they're cranky and they're not necessarily they're not technology averse, but they're not necessarily all over it, and we're trying to get them to help themselves. So I don't want people to be making support calls into our support office to say, I've forgotten how to add contacts. And, you know, I want them to be able to ask the device, how do I add a contact? And it'll say add contacts, idiot. It's those type of things. So we make the device as robust as we can. We have tutorials, we have videos, we have user guides, things like that. But working with the demographic is very hard because they won't deal with printed things. We also have another issue, Kristen, because some bad news for you. Women are more likely to suffer a visual impairment than men, materially. And we have this issue that sometimes happens. We have two issues that are a bit horrifying for me. One of them is that we deliver a voice-operated smart device to people. The wife, who it's been bought for, has difficulty operating it. The husband says, "Give it to me. I'll show you what to do." And then he goes, "Well, it's a bit stupid. It doesn't seem to work. It's not giving me any clues." Although in the in what we call our
Showing me that you move your finger around the screen until you hear the item you want and then release.
so we have a touchscreen menu that we added, but in the touchscreen menu we have a section called the sighted assistance menu, and the sighted assistance menu has a version of our user guide on it in writing. It's not for our customers. It's basically for their husbands. the husbands that were snatching the device out of their hand and saying, how does this work? And we had to give them a user guide. The other thing that I can tell you that is a bit horrifying is our number one reason for contract cancellation is death. And it's kind of a bit weird. So we have these kind of endless challenges and things we discover new, and as an organization, one of the things that we deal with is trying to avoid the trap of a whole lot of sighted white guys sitting in a room deciding what blind people on the other side of the planet want. And it's an endless challenge for us, but it's a great challenge, because when we win at a kind of commercial level, we win at a changing lives of people. Sometimes we get testimonials where people are a bit all weepy and, you know, you've changed my life. You don't understand what you've done. And we deal with people who say, well, why is this such a big deal? And the answer is because operating your mobile phone with your eyes closed is not the same as being visually impaired. It's not even close. Anyway, that's all I've got to say. Is anyone questions? Oh. It's processing in the cloud. I don't think so.
So that the audience can hear me remotely at home. The question was, what exactly is your product and the components of it, please? Okay,
so there's a couple of things there's actually a number of components. So when people go and they get a box and they get this and they go, oh, Pocket, RealSam Pocket is a phone. It's actually, what it is an Android phone in kiosk mode with our software running on it that processes, has the ASR on it, the automatic speech recognition, captures the voice, turns it into text, sends it off into the cloud to our conversational AI with the RealSam app running that figures out what people want, what can do about it, and what resources it can access, sends back a response, and it speaks it out loud or does things. So Play My Book streams an audio book. By the way, when you're in visually impaired, you have the right under the Marrakesh Treaty to access audiobooks for free in subscriber countries. So books is quite a big deal. So that's what it is. But I could also say to you that our product is also the website that we attach to each device. So each device has its own portal, so you can alter, so friends and family can alter stuff on the device. So you could also say maybe a part of it is the SIM card in it that's providing the network connectivity or the Wi-Fi connection that you've got as well. So there's a whole lot of things that come together to create this product that people generally only see the front end being the phone component. And that phone component, as I said, it's actually a Samsung handset with our software running on it. We like Samsung because they have, we have problems with Apple devices and automatic speech recognition because they don't really like you using anything else but them. But the Samsung phones have the tendency to have the longest lifespan. So an HTC may turn over at 12 months. Samsung will do 18 months, and in some of their ranges will do a fair bit longer in their first responder ranges. So we use a product called the Xcover 5 in the UK, which is actually the baby of their public kind of official thing. It's a robust phone. You can smash it and drop it, and you can change the battery, and it's IP65 and things like that. We quite like that one. And that one we expect to get a couple of years out of before we have to turn it over. So our challenge just becomes dealing with versions of Android as they change.
Can I? Yep.
Yeah.
Do you have user groups?
No, we have had user groups in the past, and what we discovered was that we didn't have enough bandwidth to manage them well, and we had some slanging matches and bad mouthing and bad behavior. So we're a bit nervous. We're actually a bit nervous about when we give users voice, because in fact we've tested some solutions, and very quickly we got ugliness appeared, and we thought, oh my God, now we've got a governance problem. Well, it was one of the other things that I discovered. I'd never dealt with people with impairments or disabilities before, but what I discovered is I had this mistaken idea that if someone had a disability or an impairment, they were wonderful human beings. That's not true. They're just as they can be just as ugly as the rest of us. And there's there's bad people and good people, and it was quite a shock to realize. In fact, on the very first day we tested an indoor navigation system that worked on Bluetooth beacons, and we allowed our users to label shops. And some of the shop labels that were made on the first day weren't safe for work. So we've been a bit nervous about that.
I was fascinated by the cultural travel journey that you've been through, sort of between here and particularly the US. It reminds me a bit of some of my experiences doing business in the US. I was small. We weren't a huge company with 30 employees. We were a little company with about 3 or 4 or 5 people, but we did do business in the US. And you triggered a number of memories for me, things like the words they use. I had a wannabe customer once, a couple of cases. Oh, one customer, I was writing to and telling about our product. We made electronic controllers for machines, and I used the word inbuilt in some of my documentation. And he came back and said, "What does this word inbuilt mean?" Quite seriously.
Yeah. So
as if they got this incredibly narrow view of the language, and that's it. And
well, there is that question with America about why do the English speak English, an American language, rather than some European language? It's better. Language things that would hit me every single day. I would have every 2 or 3 days, someone would say to me, "I just love your British accent." So it's always a stab in the heart, that one. The other thing was that my laptop thinks it's an American laptop, so it's optimized for America. It uses US language, but I'm an Australian operating it, and sometimes I'm writing documentation like our terms and conditions of sale in the UK. I'm writing for the UK on an American laptop with an Australian, and what would happen is that the document would be littered with little squiggly underlines to say you spelt this word wrong. And then word by word, I have to think, no, there should be an S. There's S belongs there, not Z. S belongs there, not Z. And I'd have another Z. Yeah. So those kind of things, they just create a little bit more friction. So maybe if you're used to working at, say 100% speed, then maybe you're working at 95% speed because you're having to double check yourself and thinking, "Oh God, is that right? I don't know. And is that word correct? Can I choose it? Not, is it spelt right? But can I choose that word, or should I use a different word? Should I?" And also phrases like you get used to saying things like, someone would help me and I say, "Thank you, ma'am." And if I say "Thank you, ma'am" in Australia, people would look at me and say, "Oh, that's peculiar." And this is aside from the driving on the other side of the road and all of those kind of things. There's those ones. The other thing actually about traveling there and relocating there for some time is, now that we've returned to Australia, and I'm getting this all the time, people are saying to me, "Isn't it great to be home?" I say, "Well, I don't currently live in my house. I don't currently drive a car that I own. My children used to live with me. They no longer live with me. They now live, we've just become empty nesters. And the two of us, our shipping hasn't arrived from the US yet. I think it's in Sydney now, but we've been living out of a suitcase of clothes, my wife and I, for the last 3 months. So when people say welcome home, it's a bit, yes, but there's awful lots of pieces missing. And we've also discovered that the world doesn't like you to maintain a residence in 2 countries. It really doesn't like that, because are you an Australian or an American for tax purposes? You must choose. And you say, "But I'm generating income in both companies. I'm renting a house out in Australia while we live overseas, and I've got my PAYG type income, my personal exertion income in the US." and then and then we get a shared dividend or something. And it's like, well, you saying I have to choose, but why do I have to choose? I don't think that. And they say, well, you have to put one down. We can't come back. I'm registering a vehicle. This caught me. I'm trying to register. My wife discovered a vehicle she liked, and it was in Newcastle. So we flew to Newcastle last week and got a permit and drove it back down, but it's unregistered. I go to register the vehicle and it says, where do you live? This is Vic Roads versus where the vehicle's garaged. And because I'm attempting to answer truthfully, all of a sudden there's a problem. It says, well, why isn't the vehicle garaged at your residence, but garaged in a different suburb? The world does. So it's kind of, we discovered it's really weird that everyone says, go export and expand and invest in it. And then at the same time, we're kind of punished in lots of different ways for not just having a standard life. And it's quite, I know that probably thousands, if not millions of people before me have run into the same issues, but we just discovered governments don't like it. Australian government doesn't like it. In fact, my wife was at the bank yesterday having to prove that she's in Australia. And it was weird. She's like, I'm in your branch. Yeah.
Brendan, we've got a question from Peter Carpenter on line. Go ahead, Peter.
Okay, thanks. It's fascinating, Brendan. You've got a wonderful challenge. A couple of questions for you, and the second question is about using a phone with your eyes closed. But first, it looks as though you're onto it, but it seems to me that one of the most valuable resources companies have is searches that yield no results, and recording what those searches are seems to be a primary opportunity for developing answers that people want. Am I right in thinking that you identify that?
Yes, we do. We have and I'd like us to be doing a better job of it and change the way that we do it. But we use Google's Data Studio to look at usage of our products, and what we call them internally, we call them talents, the different features, and we call them talents because they may actually, components of it may spread across a whole lot of things, different mediums, and we also want to differentiate them from calling them apps, even though kind of technically they're apps, but they're apps when they're on the handset. But we measure our no comprendos, and what's the no comprendo response. We measure that everywhere, and we look at that, and in fact we pull those out. And one of the things that we're testing at the moment, we don't use machine learning in our product because it's about language and logic for a domain to make sure that there's high confidence in answers. But what we are now doing is spitting out all the no comprendos into another engine and saying, can you give us a summary of how we could be doing better? So it's coming back to us and saying, okay, this is how we should be doing better on our job, better on in our interface. So we use it at that level. Searches that need no result yield no results. The biggest area that happens for us is in our library and book module, and it just basically means that people don't have those books in their library. So that's not as necessarily as useful to us, but because none of us are going to dash out and write a book, and because we're not a general purpose artificial intelligence, we don't have people asking questions like, I'd like to buy a fishing rod. We don't answer that. We don't, because that's not what we do. Does that help? Is that a reasonable answer?
Yes, sounds good. And what about the difference between using a phone with your eyes closed and your device when you're blind? The difference.
So it's a bit like, for me, a good metaphor is that a book and a movie are different mediums. In a book, it's easy to represent what someone's thinking. In a movie, it's a lot harder without being kind of clumsy and cartoonish. But at the same time, in a movie, you can have a landscape that's beautiful and exquisite and moves you, and you can't do that in a book. Same between audio and audio and visual interfaces, and I'm coming to why with your eyes closed, but in a visual interface, you have a certain amount of real estate. And in that real estate, you want people to be able to access and find everything. So I click my finger on the screen, a menu pops up. I've got options in the menu. I can click and drill down. And you can see that in our touchscreen menu, the same kind of concept there. In an audio interface, the real estate is unlimited. So none of our customers know what you can actually tell the device to do. They know what we talk about in the user guide, but that's about actually half the language that works. So we don't have things, and a lot of the other language that we have that works is internal engineering stuff or stuff that we're trying. So no one's going to go to the device and say service info and find out what server it's running, or device info and determine what the IMEI code of a handset is. You know, there's those type of things. Now, so I say that to give it context. Using a device with your eyes closed is someone knows what they want to do. And if you run your finger over screen on an Android phone in the talkback mode or whatever it's called in Android, it's not talkback. If you run your finger over that, it's kind of quite noisy. It's trying to help you, trying to do the right thing. You select something, and it's you have to focus a little bit, and you do your job and so I can use it with my eyes closed. See, I did that. But then thinking about from the moment that you got up to the moment you went to bed, you had your eyes closed and you're using the phone all the time, you would become massively frustrated, because the phone's kind of, as you move your fingers, it's shouting at you all the time about, because you're not used to being more patient and slower. And it's the other thing is that to do clever things, and on the iPhone, they have a whole lot of specific hand movements you can do, like a triple tap does this and a double tap does that, and a double slide does something else. So there's all these complex hand movements. A person who's visually impaired is prepared to become adept at this, especially if they're younger. People with their eyes closed, oh, that's a pain that's a pain. I don't want to do that. So you have those type of issues. And the other thing I noticed, and it's a bit horrifying when the first time you come across this, but people who are visually impaired listen to a lot of audiobooks, and they listen to it at a much faster speed, and they listen to the interfaces at a much faster speed. So the first advisor I appointed in the US was a guy called Fred Schroeder, who was the president of the World Services or the World Blind Union. And I'd go to Fred's house, and he'd be moving his hand at fingers at high speed to whip through menus and do things, and he was good at it. People who close their eyes aren't good at it, and it's frustrating, and especially if it's not optimized for them. That was a big answer. I don't know if it was a good answer, but it was a big answer.
Very good, thanks.
Okay.
Can you explain about belief, intent, and desire?
No.
Okay.
No, but beliefs. I'm not the right person for this. But beliefs is it's a way of kind of representing the world. The beliefs. The device has beliefs about the state of the world, or the state of you, the state of. So the beliefs. It believes this is what the state of the play is. Desires, in our context, from my understanding, is the way that we can do the way that things can be achieved, and then understanding what your intent is according to this desire, according to this belief. So if you say, how do I exit a building? The answer is in the elevator, idiot. But if the building is on fire, the device has to know believe that state exists. If it's fire, then you don't do it. You do it by the stairs. So it works kind of that way. That's the BDI component of it. The agents, they can, they're like little insects running around doing everything with their own missions, which are intelligent agents because they breed as required. So you could be, a good example of it is maybe you're searching for a book in the middle of the book book search, you take a phone call. I take a phone call from David. I need to send a message to you, and then I'm back to my book search where I was, which is not something you can do with Siri or a lot of the others. You can't just jump around from topic to topic and come back to where you were.
Sorry, did you say the agent's breed is required?
Yes.
How's that work?
The visual, so they're spawned as required. That's the mental image in my head is actually I've got the little insects just running around, and they're multiplying and they're coming back and vanishing at the end of it. So we have things. So the reason that the technology is massively scalable is we also spin up servers as we require them, and we kill off our servers about every 4 hours. So we just got this constantly expanding number of servers that, as per demand, each server that we run, I think, supports about 100 simultaneous users. So, you could have 500. We don't kind of care. It just expands, and it's quite well supported like that in the world. In the world of AWS is quite happy to support us to do that. Our issues are more, that then creates issues for us too around user information and personally identifiable information. Personally identifiable information is really big deal in the US, where things like GDPR aren't a big deal. So spam people as much as you like, don't store their information. It's kind of that's the kind of summary message I have in my head there. But the technology questions, I'm not the right guy.
Brendan, it's just moved, the time's moved on. Are there any questions from the floor or anyone at home? Obviously not. Well, Brendan, on behalf of the club, I do have a question, but it's not from me, it's from my wife. And she's been watching, and she said, you've talked a lot about artificial intelligence, but she's married to some fool apparently that hasn't got ordinary intelligence. And she just wonders how he would cope with it. If he can't do an intelligent thing at home, could he handle artificial intelligence? So on behalf of the club,
Thank you.
And once again, I have to tell you, this has got no intelligence in it. It was made last week by a young maiden stomping on some red grapes. We're still back in the 18th century making our wine here. So thank you very much. Most informative.
Cheers.
And thanks for coming.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all.
So it's 8:05. We'll have a 15-minute break and be back at 20 minutes past, and the members present can go to the back, and there's some little nibbles. Buy a raffle ticket and be involved in the draw. I'd now like to call upon our president, Hugh McDonald. He's not on the horizon, so here he's coming. So
how many people there tonight?
Was that a question just then? From Zoom? Anyway, good evening, everyone. Good evening, Rabin, and good evening to everyone on Zoom. Thank you all for coming along tonight, whether you're coming along in person or coming along virtually. And thanks as always to all the volunteers who've helped out tonight here at Moorabbin to put this meeting together. So yeah, it's good to see once again a few members coming back to Moorabbin, and for anyone out there on Zoom, I'd like to encourage you to come along. It's a good night out. There's refreshments. You get to meet the speaker in person, and so yeah, do consider coming along next month and the months after, and I'm sure you'll enjoy the experience. Thank you very much to Brendan for speaking tonight. Very interesting topic. Yeah, it's one that fascinates me. I've got a house full of Google Home devices, so yeah, it's a very, very fascinating topic. So thank you. for people here, especially at Moorabbin, we had some feedback last month that it'd be nice to be able to see the people on Zoom as you're sitting there watching the Zoom meeting. So we've had some meetings in the last few weeks, and we've resolved to bring another projector into the room here in Moorabbin, so which will show the Zoom meeting, so you can have the presenters PowerPoint on one projector and the Zoom meeting on the other projectors. So we're hoping to have that ready for testing for the April meeting. So that'll be interesting to see how that goes. During the month, we've had a couple of queries, about our Google services. I'd just like to remind everyone, so, you have Google Consumer Services, and you have what we have, which is Google Cloud Services. And there's quite a difference between Google Consumer Services and Google Cloud Services. The Google Consumer Services are, things like Gmail and Google Maps and all those kind of things. And obviously they're free services that Google provides. So therefore, they do collect data on you, anonymous data, as a condition of providing those free services. What we have though for our club use for melbpc.org.au, if you use the email system and spaces and things like that, is Google Cloud, which is an enterprise service. It's ISO 27701 certified, which is an international standard for data security. So, it's the top security that you can have for an enterprise, IT service. And so, it's used by big organizations, all throughout the world, big accounting firms, sections of government, universities, all those kind of things, the exact same service that we use. So, in this day and age of being concerned about your data and being extra vigilant about, what is happening to it, you can feel quite confident that all of that data within the melbpc.org.au Google Workspace system is being retained by us. It's not being used by anyone else, Google or anyone else. So I just want to reiterate that if you were at all unsure. Finally, our newest group within the club that you may not have heard too much about is Sunday sessions. So if you're into, making and learning how to, pull apart computers and pull apart devices and, getting right down into the nitty gritty of what you're doing with your computer and your devices, then it's a it's a great group to come along to. Every second Sunday here at Moorabbin from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. So yeah, if that is of interest, then do keep that in mind. Do come along and check it out. The last session we had was on how to repair devices, and we've got sessions coming up on things like how to make your own Ethernet cables, how to use a welder, and different things like that. So yeah, if that is of interest, do come along to those. Finally, questions. Does anyone have any questions, either from the audience here at Moorabbin or out there on Zoom? Yeah.
Question, you mentioned the Sunday program.
So yeah, we're starting to do that. We've got actually a meetup group that where that will be published. So I'll get that circulated as well, so you can find out what's going to be taking place there. Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
You want me to repeat again? Okay. This one is it? You mentioned it's on a Sunday, 1 to 3. It's only 2 hours, very short.
Yeah. That's enough.
It takes me an hour to come here.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Anyone else? Anyone out there on Zoom?
Yeah, Hugh, Peter
Yeah.
Carpenter.
Yeah.
I wasn't near my mic a couple of months ago when you mentioned that science, do they call it a science fair at Monash?
Yeah, Monash Maker Fair, Peter. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I found it very interesting. There were lots of little things there for children to make physically, and little experiments to perform. But I found other things there, like the sounding rocket that Monash sent off to the US in a competition. You remember that one? Jetstar lost it on its way, but they managed to get it there in time and launch. They came 11th in the competition, which was pretty good for Australia because there were certain laws that they had to comply with to do with munitions in aircraft. And then there were massive 3D printing machines and all sorts of little devices that they were making. So yeah, thanks for recommending it, and I recommend that you publicise it again next year.
Yeah, well, I think it's going to be held every second year, so there'll be another
Second
one
year.
2024. But I think from what I heard on the day, this year there might be a smaller one somewhere like Lilydale. So yeah, hopefully we'll be able to take part in that.
Yeah, good.
But yeah, thanks for mentioning that, Peter. Anyone else? Any other questions? Okay, well, thanks everyone. Enjoy your month, and I'll see you all next month.
Thank you, Hugh. Now, the last part of our evening is someone from the iHelp team. The note I got said it was Cedric, but I'm not sure if he's there. And if you are, or whoever is the iHelp helper, over to you.
Here we are. Yes. Can you hear me?
We certainly can.
Okay. Well, if for any questions, I'll tackle them. I've got one or two notes I thought I might make if there's no other questions that anybody's putting in. In the room, are there any questions coming up?
Anyone in the room got a question for our iHelp helper? No, they're obviously all reasonably up with it all. So maybe if we use the hands up for those on Zoom, if anyone has a question.
While we're just thinking about it, I thought I've seen one or two comments about security and scamming and so forth. So I thought I might mention one or two of them. I've noticed that recent times there's quite a trend to move from email to SMS base. SMS, you don't quite get as much ability to test what the URL looks like and things like this. It's not quite as easy on your phone. So if you get an SMS something or other, think twice before doing much on it. A second rule with pretty much anything, these people, obviously they know a bit about computing, but they're also very good psychologists. They know what will push your buttons. If it's anything that puts you in a panic, try very hard to walk away and think before you act. Typical one I got a while ago, or be a bit over a month ago, I reckon, SMS, it stated that I had an overdue invoice. Well, the link, I looked at it, that you had to put a button on was https://link.techo.top. Well, that's could be anything. So you immediately think, wait a minute, we're going to take this a little bit easy. With a bit of care, I opened it up and my browser did not bring up a flag. It was immediately saying that there was an overdue for tollway. I can't remember whether it said whether it was Eastlink or CityLink. I don't quite remember that. But it said enter your registration number in here. I immediately thought, oh, that's interesting that they don't say what the rego number is. It's got this overdue toll. So I chose a rego number that I had about 25 years ago, which has not been a valid registration for about 20 years. And it immediately showed that I had $6.70 owing. And here's a button to pay for it. I immediately went out of that, tried another one with an even older number plate. Once more, $6.70 owing. Here's a link to pay. So obviously, didn't matter what your registration number was put in, exactly the same thing. Sorry, I've got a phone call coming in. I'll have to reject. So that's a typical one. Another one that succeeded of somebody else I know. Now I'm just trying to get it. It was, oh, I did have this. Oh, yes. It had a heading, and this was an SMS. ATO, you're required to confirm the data. Non-compliance of this obligation may result in penalties. And then it gave an https:// address. The address was ato-verify.net/data. Well, if it's government, obviously you know that it's going to be .gov.au, or if it's a Victorian government, state government, it'll have the state one in name in as well, vic.gov.au. Both those, of course, tend to put you into a panic. The one about the overdue invoice, well, you know that if you don't pay an invoice, it's quickly going to escalate to a much bigger amount. So they're assuming that you will know that, and therefore you'll very quickly pay the invoice. So anything that's really panics you, please be very careful. Anyway, have we had any reactions come up as yet? I can't see. Can anybody else see any raised hands or any other questions?
Peter Carpenter's got his hand up.
Me again.
Right.
Just on being careful with those spammers, Cedric.
Yeah.
If anyone still has a landline, I have one here beside me at my desk, and I often get calls, and they're usually spammers. But I've now adopted the practice of lifting up the handset and listening for 2 or 3 seconds, and 2 or 3 seconds of silence sounds like a long time, but in that period, if no one says anything, if you don't say anything, the system, the computer at the other end, will hang up. So a couple of actual people have called me, but they've spoken first. So yeah, just don't speak and wait for 2 or 3 seconds.
Yes.
Yeah,
Oh, all right.
I'll go along with Peter Carpenter's comments. I've done the same thing, and nothing happens. Just drops off. As we know, it's a robot caller. It's a robot machine, and as Peter said, it waits for some sound, some results, no results, and you get deleted off their list. Hopefully.
Yes, there are lots of ways in which spam come. So it's, and just occasionally it will be, the spam will just be very convenient to fit in of something that you're expecting, and that will get round your defences. So even if it's, even if you're waiting for a parcel delivery and you get an SMS from the delivery people about something or other, don't assume that it's legitimate. It might just be that they've got lucky. They've sent 100,000 spams out, and one of them happens to be arrive at the time when you're expecting what's just come.
My son and daughter-in-law sent us an email or a message, I forget which, from Perth to say they'd sent a parcel to us. I was interested the number of odd text messages we got about a parcel being delivered to us. So I don't know where they got the information from, but we weren't worried if the parcel didn't turn up. It wasn't my problem, it was my son's. Richard.
Yeah, I've got a couple of those toll invoice SMS as well, but I've generally been making a habit now of copying the details and reporting it on the ScamWatch website, the scamwatch.gov.au, in the hopes that they collect enough information to be able to stop these fellas.
I've done that. I've taken a screen capture of what I've got and sent it to ScamWatch.
Yes, yeah, I'll do some similar thing. Or no, I've actually got my mobile linked to the PC, so I can actually cut and paste and put it straight into the ScamWatch website report.
Problem is, if they are located overseas, even if it comes in by telephone rather than by email, even if it comes in by telephone, they may well have a dummy Australian number, even though they're calling from overseas. And you see an Australian number when it hasn't come from Australia. If they're located overseas, well, the authorities have got a dickens of a job to do anything about them, even if they manage to find out who's sending it.
But on the plus side, at least if you give them the website, they've got a chance of shutting those websites down.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Tom Ratto, you've got a question?
Yes, I'm muted. I have a list of scam reporting. One is to ACMA, that's a general one that you report and they acknowledge it. And especially emails. If it's scam email, I just forward it on to ACMA. And and also I got the email address for PayPal and most of the banks and Telstra, and I also forward it to them and they acknowledge it. And what they do with it, how they stop it, at least I do my job to make them aware that the spammers are around. And I think everybody could do that too. As soon as the first one arrives, they may stop it. And if it comes from Gmail, they can ask Gmail to stop them. Well, you see, they generally use Gmail, Yahoo, and things like that.
Some of these spams, of course, are designed to only last a few hours. That ATO one I mentioned, it arrived on a Thursday afternoon, and this particular person didn't know much about computing, and she actually put in the once you clicked on the link, you were taken to a site that asked you to enter the details of your driver's license. This was a couple of months before the Optus hack. And she put the driver's license in, later on notified me about this, and another member, I immediately posted it on to the what do you call it, our chat page. And anyway, Spaces, one of your members was up pretty late, and he said at 2 a.m. the next morning, as I said, it came live. This thing started being circulated late afternoon. By 2 a.m., some of the browsers had warning signs on it. It was the following afternoon before I looked at it, and by that time Firefox wouldn't even allow me to go to the site. It wasn't that Firefox had a warning sign, Firefox just totally blocked it. And so those sorts of things are designed, send out enough, and hopefully there'll be a few people give you what you want before they get blocked.
I've got a friend I've known for 73 years, just showing how old I am, retired like me, but had a very responsible high management position. His 55-year-old daughter flew up to Sydney and was catching a train, Sydney, Adelaide, Perth. He got a message from her to say, oh, she's lost her mobile phone, dropped it in the toilet, and she forgot she had a bill for $6,100, and could Dad pay it? And he couldn't get onto the bank quick enough to pay it. And his wife came home, and he told his wife, and she said, did you ring our daughter? And he said, no. So they rang their daughter, and she said, I know nothing about it. And I was just absolutely surprised that an intelligent man would do that. But it was his little daughter in trouble. He was going to help her out.
You know, two of my wife's friends have fallen for that. It's the hi mum scam.
Yeah.
And,
yeah, that's what this was.
That's fairly common. That was a hi dad scam, I guess. But
no, it was probably mums.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very standard one. Right now, actually, on my phone, I have one, except the variation is the SMS says it comes from mum, but it's the same sort of thing. Send $500. I just thought I'd leave it here to have it accessible until I'd finish this session. But it's the sort of thing that immediately sends you into a panic, gets you quite concerned, and people do respond to it. So the rule I started with first thing in this session, that's the rule you have to apply to those.
Cedric,
yes.
Is there any way that we as users can further identify the source of these scams, or do we rely on us passing it on to the appropriate people and then let them scratch their brains and figure out the source?
Mostly you won't find the source yourself, and as often as not, people who know a bit about IP addresses, I don't, when I see, if you expand the IP address, the address details and so forth in the email, and certainly you can do this with Thunderbird, and I think probably a lot of others, I haven't tried doing the others. If you expand the address, you'll see a whole list of IP addresses that's come through, gone from one computer server to another server to another server sort of thing before it got to you. That's people who can interpret those are able to get some idea of what country it came from. I'm not sure they can always do it. Sometimes they can. Sometimes it can be hidden, particularly if it's a VPN. The sender's using a VPN to hide his location. So basically, for most of us, we don't know where it's coming from. Sometimes the authorities will be able to find it. Sometimes it'll be hidden, and it'll take more than just the average fellow in ACMA or somewhere like this to find it. It just depends how clever you are, how far you can follow it. So, yeah, and SMS, I think, is probably a bit more difficult to trace in an email.
Thanks, Cedric.
There's a protocol in the US called stir shaken, whereby they're trying to insist that all telephone carriers can identify the caller, the originating caller. So with any luck, that'll work, and ultimately we might see it here. Stir shaken.
Yeah. Right. All right. I hadn't heard about that one. Anybody else?
We've got a question from someone in the building.
Just a comment. I think the more people who report these scams or attempted scams to ScamWatch, the better chance they've got of being able to find the origin.
Yeah.
Pretty hard just from one, but if they've got a whole plethora of them, it must make it easier. And ScamWatch, you can subscribe to ScamWatch, and I think they send you an email from time to time and let you know what scams are going. And if you look at their website, they've got a summary of all the different types of scams that are going. And I think it's good to look at those because it just reminds you of what's going on and just makes you a little bit more alert. Sometimes it's some of us who think we're clever enough to identify scams are the ones who get caught because we get a bit too confident. And you got to remember, these people are professionals.
The reason I report it is for that reason. Am I the only one in the world that's got it, or am I one of thousands? And obviously, if I'm the only one that reports it, it'd be low priority for them. But if they get a couple of hundred a day, they treat it as a bit serious.
Yes.
One more.
Yeah, just a comment. Charles Tippendale here. There's a website called Reverse Australia, I think it is, and you invited to type the phone number of what you got, and it'll tell you how many other people have reported that same phone number and any comments about it. Reverse Australia, just look it up. It's free.
We'll note that. Tom Ratto, you've got a question?
I have a question, but seeing that we got time, one of the scammers, if I have time, I'll let them carry on a bit. And then I say to them, look, why don't you get yourself another job? You know, you're doing this scamming. And the fellow said to me, have you got another job? I'm looking for a job.
Yeah, I've heard of other people who sort of, when they get a scam phone call, they sort of play dumb and string the fellow along for 3/4 of an hour and then just point out to him that they're onto what he's up to, and they feel satisfaction for having wasted 3/4 of an hour of his time. But people have got different ways of doing things.
Well, I done that too, by the way, and then he swore at me.
That would probably give you a fair sense of satisfaction, I think, if he got upset.
I had two phones once. I had a business phone, a house phone, and about the same time, I got a call on each one, which was both of them obviously from the same mob. So to each one I said, oh, I'm glad you called. I do have that problem. I'll talk to this person. And I said that to the other person and then put the two phones together and let them talk to each other.
I had a gentleman ring me up once, and I must admit it sounded pretty genuine. I didn't pick it, but I was stringing him along, and my wife came. We had a tradesman there and said he wanted to speak to me, and I said to the man on the phone, "Sorry, I've got to go." And he said, "How long will you be?" And I said, "Oh, 15 minutes." He said, "I'll ring you back." So when the tradesman went, I thought, look, I really wonder what this bloke's on about. So I rang George Scarbeck, and just as I was talking to George, this bloke rang back. So I put George in this on, and the man at the other end said, "You've insulted me," and hung up. So got rid of him. Lance, do you have a question?
Yes, any evidence that these scammers have been, any scammers have been caught by doing all this reporting?
A lot of them are based in third world countries. A lot of more often than not, they've got the local police in their pocket. So doing much about them can be quite difficult. I have a friend that comes from Mumbai, or Bombay as it used to be called. A quite wealthy part of Bombay. It's what's called a Parsi community, a very closed community of people formerly from Persia. Directly opposite that community is a multi-story building, and it's just a call center sort of set up, and basically spamming call center. Multi-story building.
There was a program last year I was most interested, and they went to a building like that, which was full of scammers. And they spoke to one gentleman and said, "Don't you feel terrible, you know, thieving people?" And he said, "I am not a thief. Those people give me their money." And he was convinced that he wasn't doing the wrong thing. People were giving him money under false pretenses, but he didn't think so. Lance, you've got another question, comment?
Sorry, I forgot to put my hand down, but it sounded a bit like the admission by Rupert Murdoch the other day that if you lie, it's okay to lie, provided you get some money out of it.
Yes, yep, saw that.
Another response that I've heard is that you say on the phone immediately, you say, "The job's done, but there's blood everywhere." And then you hang up.
Any further questions at home or anything? Well, look, Cedric, you've occupied the time. I don't know whether you had any more to say, but it's approaching 9 o'clock. I think the Zoom may stay open for a short while, but we might conclude the meeting and say good night. And just a reminder for those that want to go to the waffle SIG, there's a few going. If you don't know, there's a flyer out in the foyer, so you can find out where to go. Our next meeting will be on April the 5th, and we'll see you all there, and hopefully a few of you may come along physically here and partake of a lavish supper. So good night. Thanks for attending.